I'm sure a lot of you guys remember the old ceremonial hunting tradition of eating the heart out of the first animal you kill. Meat from those organs are among the most nutrient-rich foods on the planet. You can get those same benefits your ancestors craved via convenient daily capsules from Heart and Soil. Find out more at heartandsoil.co. And remember, use code MeatEater for 10% off your purchase. There's nothing like snook hook sets at dawn or catching a tarpon in the moonlight. Find your next fishing trip made easy on fishingbooker.com and experience the magic of the Sunshine State or any other destination on your fishing bucket list. Book a blue water adventure in search of sailfish or go snapper fishing with the kids. With over 6,000 captains and trips to choose from, planning your next one just got a whole lot easier. Download the Fishing Booker app on the Google Play or App Store or visit them online at fishingbooker.com to book your trip today.
Welcome to the Wired to Hunt podcast, home of the modern whitetail hunter. And now, your host, Mark Kenyon.
Welcome to the Wired to Hunt podcast. I'm your host, Mark Kenyon, and today on the show, we are joined by Michael Hunsucker of Heartland Bowhunter to run him through the What Would You Do gauntlet. And we're going to get some bonus updates on a very exciting piece of wildlife conservation news. All right, welcome to the Wired to Hunt podcast brought to you by First Light. And as I just mentioned, we've got a two-parter for you today. The first part is exciting conservation news, an important update for everyone that I wanted to get out to you right away so that we can start making a difference on this front. We're going to be talking about the Recovering America's Wildlife Act with John Gale of Backcountry Hunters and Anglers. This is going to be one of the most impactful pieces of legislation that could impact wildlife and wildlife habitat across the country in years and years, decades probably, maybe a generation. This is on the scale of the good kind of stuff we did last year when the Great American Outdoors Act was passed for public lands. This could do that kind of good for the critters that we love to watch, hunt, learn about, all sorts of stuff like that. So I highly encourage you to tune in for this first part because we, as hunters, can make a positive difference in helping this kind of thing move forward. So the first 45 minutes of today's episode is going to be about that. The second part is going to be diving into some deep whitetail deer hunting discussion with Mike Hunsucker from Heartland Bowhunter. It's an amazing show if you haven't watched it yet. Mike's been dedicated to bow hunting for a very long time now, hunting all across the Midwest and across the country, and he does a very good job of it. And today we're going to pick his brain about how he does those things and what he would do in a series of challenging circumstances, how he would handle things when it comes to managing a property, how he would handle some situations when it comes to scouting and preparing a property, what he would do in certain tricky deer hunting situations in the season. As you've probably heard me do with people over the last year and a half, I'm going to run him through all these. We're going to pick his brain to see what he would do, why he would do it, how he would do it, what his thought process is, all that kind of good stuff, which will hopefully give us a unique level of insight into his deer hunting approach, mindset, and process. So that's today's episode. Like I mentioned, first 45 minutes or so is important conservation news that I hope you'll listen to and that I hope you'll take some action on. Second part is going to be some serious deer hunting know-how. So with that all said, hope you enjoy this. Thanks for being here. And let's get to my chat first with John Gale of Backcountry Hunters and Anglers. All right, with me now on the line, I've got John Gale. John, thanks for taking the time to be here on the show.
Thanks for having me, Mark. It's a pleasure.
Yeah, I am excited to talk with you because I feel like we've got at least the potential for good news on the horizon. It's so, and maybe you probably do feel the same way as I do on this, I'd guess. Maybe not, but I subscribe to a lot of different newsletters and I get lots of updates that send me environmental and conservation and public land related news and stories like every day of the week. And it just seems like every day I pull up my inbox and I read through the headlines and I read this and I read that, or I look on Instagram and I see this update and this piece of news. and I get disheartened. Just so many pieces of bad news, or this thing's coming down the line, or this place got whatever burned down or locked up or drilled or whatever it might be. It seems like it's easy to get overwhelmed sometimes with the depressing things that are happening to our natural resources and our wild landscapes. So today I'm hoping that we can dive into something that is pointing towards a better future, and that's the Recovering America's Wildlife Act. And can you just give us a headline on that to get us started? What's in your mind? Like, what is the headline? What's the key message that people need to hear when it comes to this?
Yeah, perfect way to kick things off. So Recovering America's Wildlife Act is a really thoughtful way to address places for wildlife investment that just haven't been made. So hunters and anglers in particular have done a great job in leading the way towards recovering big game species and what we, might call huntable, fishable populations of fish and wildlife species that were, on the brink in many ways for many species, especially big game species, but also migratory wildlife, migratory bird species at the turn of the century when we decided we needed modern day wildlife management in the early 1900s and really started putting the pieces together. But over time, investments from excise tax programs like Pittman Robertson and Dingle Johnson, which hunters and anglers should be proud of, and our sort of legacy and indelible impact on supporting fish and wildlife through the organizations that we support or the purchases we're making. We've done a great job on a lot of species, but not all the species. And what this legislation would do is invest in non-game species and ensure that those that are most threatened, most vulnerable, stay out of the emergency room, so to speak. And when I talk about the emergency room, I'm referring to the Endangered Species Act, when species become listed as threatened or endangered. And when you list a species under ESA, that's when it gets very expensive to manage fish and wildlife populations, to bring them back. So the idea is to invest in species that might be vulnerable or at risk now to ensure that they don't get to the emergency room in the first place. Works the same way with humans, right? Insurance companies know this. If you go get your checkup once in a while and you're staying on top of your healthy body situation, it's way cheaper than an emergency room visit, and you call 911. So same is true for wildlife. And that's exactly what this legislation would do. It would dedicate almost $1.4 billion annually to help state, territorial, and tribal fish and wildlife management agencies to proactively manage those at-risk species and prevent them from being added to the federal list of threatened and endangered species. It's bipartisan, which I'm super pumped about. Congresswoman Debbie Dingell from Michigan there out your way.
Yeah.
Congressman Jeff Fortenberry from Nebraska, Republican, round out things on the House side of the equation. In the other chamber, in the Senate, we have Senator Martin Heinrich from New Mexico and Senator Blunt from Missouri, sort of filling out the bipartisan nature. So this is supported in both the Senate and the House. It's something that is the product of really decades of hard work by hunters and anglers and business leaders, people like Johnny Morris over at Bass Pro. And it's really great in the way they look at including tribes and sovereign nations like tribal entities that play a huge role in fish and wildlife management that not a lot of people are aware of. There's a thing called state wildlife action plans, and then there's a parallel planning process the tribal management agencies utilize as well. Those have been around for decades, but they've been woefully underfunded at the state level, meaning they can't carry out all the great things that they know that they need to do for management of non-game species. So this really drives that $1.4 billion a year into making sure the implementation of those wildlife action plans is done, full bore, and that we really get to work doing this. And why hunters and anglers should care about it is the fact that, they share a habitat with game species too. And if you're taking care of, sagebrush country in the West for a non-game species, well, guess what? That's benefiting mule deer and pronghorn and elk too. And so it's a really great way to think about it. And I think the main reason why you see so many hunters and anglers and hunting and fishing organizations really behind this and putting their collective shoulder into the wheel.
Yeah. And, I think it's worth taking a step and looking at that picture a little bit more closely, because it could be easy if you're just a diehard hunter, maybe, and you look at the situation, you say, geez, it seems like we're in the golden days of deer hunting. There's deer everywhere. Or maybe you're into bear hunting and there's black bears everywhere. You love elk and there's great big elk all over the place. And you might think to yourself, I think America's wildlife is doing just fine. But to your point, there are a whole lot of critters out there that are in a much different position, and maybe they don't get the spotlight shined on them as often. But, there's this idea, it's fairly well, I think, accepted now that we're in the midst or the beginning of the potential of a sixth mass extinction type event, that these things have happened over millions and millions of years, where there's been periods of accelerated extinction, species disappearing off the face of the earth in tight windows. It seems like the extinction of species doesn't happen slowly. It seems like over geologic time, there's these big bursts of change that leads to this kind of thing. And for the first time, it seems like a lot of scientists are pointing to that we are creating that. We, as humans, all the changes that we've struck across the planet are now impacting a whole lot of animals. There was a report, I think in 2018, and you can correct me on this if I'm wrong, but I think it had pointed out that something like a third of plant and animal species and fish species across America are now at increased risk of extinction. I know internationally across the world, that might even be higher. It's insane. You can look at things even here in America, like monarch butterflies. I think 90% reduction in numbers. Salmon, of course. Anyone who fishes on the West Coast knows that salmon and steelhead runs are plummeting. Can you just speak a little bit more to this? A lot of people are referring to it as like a biodiversity crisis. This is, while whitetails might be doing great, there's a whole lot of other things out there that aren't, and really they're all connected.
Yeah, you're right to think about this in such a holistic way, and sort of pull back and take a bird's eye view. When we talk about Recovering America's Wildlife Act specifically, there's around 12,000 species that we're focused on just for that. But if you pull back and look at the phenomenon of what you're ultimately talking about, some people might refer to it as macro evolution, so to speak, right? Like that's a term that you'll see some biologists and people taking a look at what extinction really means as a natural process of what they call macro evolution. This occurs usually at a rate of around, if I'm remembering correctly, about 1 out of 1 million species becoming extinct per year. And that may sound like a small fraction, but to your point, in geological senses, in fossil record sense, it seems rapid, and the rate of species lost today remains comparable to those periods of mass extinction that you referenced. But I think the biggest difference between previous mass extinctions and the current extinction that people feel we're already experiencing right now is a level of human activity, right? Human activity was either not present at all or not a consequential presence. And now with, the destruction of habitat and the fragmentation of migration corridors, the introduction of invasive species across all taxa, over-harvesting of fish and wildlife populations. I mean, there's a pretty long list that is 100% attributable to human presence. And so we had to take a look at that and juxtapose it with what you're talking about, this tiny amount of time on a geological time scale, ranging from, what some experts say, like 10 to 50% even. And with the 5 previous extinctions on this scale being caused, mostly by cataclysmic events that really changed the course of history and life in each instance, Earth is now in one of those times again. And some of that we can't, stop or rewind the clock on, but we can do our part to focus on species that might be endangered or at risk and vulnerable in some way now, and do what we can to make the habitats they occupy more resilient, more able to withstand some of these natural cycles. And we still may see a degree of extirpation, which for those of your listeners that don't fully understand the difference between extinction and extirpation, extinction is when a species completely disappears and is no longer in existence. Extirpation is when a species used to exist someplace but no longer occupies their native range in that area. So I think extirpation is something that we should really be concerned about right now, because we're seeing that happen already with a number of species in a number of places, and it's not too late to try and do something about it. And that's why Recovering America's Wildlife Act is an essential priority for backcountry hunters and anglers where I work, but also so many other groups working on this, including our friends at the Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies, who are leading the charge through what they call the Alliance for America's Fish and Wildlife. A whole bunch of partners, BHA included, are part of that. And if you haven't checked out their website, I encourage you and anyone listening to this podcast to go to onenatureusa.com and take a look at what they have going on there. Really fantastic information. And we love to support, the people doing the great work there on the agency side of the equation.
Yeah. So speaking of what's happening on the agency side, at the state level, that's where the change is going to happen. Basically, this is going to give money to the state agencies so they can actually do their jobs. And I saw in one of the articles I read for my home state of Michigan, I can't remember the exact number. I should have wrote this down. I'm a poor podcast host, but it was something like they had a budget of $35 million a year or something to do everything they had to do. And most of that comes from funds from hunting and fishing licenses, right? Other than
tax dollars.
Yeah. And so outside of the COVID boom, which did help us pump up some numbers there, in general, there has been a decline in funding, or at least expected decline in funding for a lot of these states because of that funding resource. Now, if this were to pass, in the example of Michigan, based on the calculations they make to determine funding per state, I think if I remember is based on state size or something like that, their funding would more than double. So they would have more than double of their entire budget of what they would be doing to now actually be able to get stuff done for all of these things within that plan that they have written up for years and simply have never been able to put anyone behind some of these actions. Can you shine a little bit of light on what these plans look like, how they came to be, what kind of things might be done? I mean, I think when someone thinks about a state wildlife agency managing wild resources and stuff, they're thinking, well, they're going to, make sure that people aren't poaching deer, and they're going to make sure that there's a couple volunteer habitat days in public land and yada, yada, yada. But what are these people doing, and what could they do if they had real funding like this?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I mentioned the state wildlife action plans before. There's a sister planning process for tribal wildlife action plans in sovereign tribal nations. Those are essentially the conservation blueprints for our nation's fish and wildlife resources and preventing endangered species from becoming endangered species in the first place. That's the core of what they do. And in order to sort of meet their planning requirements, what they want to accomplish, like a tremendous amount of funding needs to be applied to each of these plans. And there have been 8 required elements essentially laid out by Congress for the plan development. And the plans are all developed in collaboration with scientists, biologists, private landowners, and a number of other people. And right now, we are looking at ways to ensure that this program, these state and tribal fish and wildlife plans, actually get funded and put together. They've been around for a very long time. I don't remember the exact year. I want to say maybe back in 2005 sticks out as a date for me for some reason. I don't know exactly why, but they've been around for a long time, and I'm pretty sure 2005 was the year that each state and each territory and the District of Columbia submitted their plan for approval to the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service as a condition for receiving funding through a program called the State Tribal Wildlife Grants Program, which has been woefully underfunded. And if you look at what the Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies says about that program, we see $61 million, more or less, is appropriated annually by Congress to the 56 states, territories, and the District of Columbia to implement the plans. But what our research suggests and indicates is that we need really about $1.3 billion annually to implement the plans. And so that nearly $1.4 billion I mentioned in the beginning for the legislation is what that number is based off of. It goes back to that research where we've worked with economists and those that focus on natural resources to actually give us some real raw information we can work with and understand. And $1.3 billion is the big number. And a bit of a history lesson that's connected to all this was the formation of a blue ribbon panel that brought together a diverse group of interests to focus on how we get there, acknowledging that we need $1.3 billion. And if we're only pumping $61 million in from Congress, that's a huge deficit that we have to make up. So they created the Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies was kind of leading this. They established the Blue Ribbon Panel on Sustaining America's Diverse Fish and Wildlife Resources. I believe that's the official name. It's been a while since I read up on it. But the goal of this Blue Ribbon Panel was to really develop a solution that was thoughtful and could get us there. And that's where the Recovering America's Wildlife Act was ultimately born. And that's where this legislative concept grew out of, and why we are where we are now, which is, very close to being on the verge of getting something done. Actually, it's getting congressional attention. It's been introduced in both the House and the Senate, and it's got a lot of support on both sides out there. So we see a realistic chance of actually moving this thing forward and getting it done. And it would do incredible things, at the state level, not just, helping agencies do what they've always done in terms of managing fish and wildlife populations, but getting to the things that they haven't been able to invest in, like, habitat restoration and working with both private landowners and public-private partnerships and the federal land management agencies that manage our public lands and waters, and really digging in on like invasive species and doing a host of important activities that they just haven't been able to spend any money doing. So like restoring habitat for the gopher tortoise, for example, would benefit quail habitat in the southeast tremendously. And you mentioned monarch butterflies. If we're enhancing pollinator habitat for monarch butterflies, that improves habitat conditions for almost all species you can think of, including deer and wild turkey and everything else. And so there is a real strong connection there, and that's why we're so pumped and excited to be a part of this.
So, last year when the Great American Outdoors Act was passed, we heard and we celebrated it as this once in a generation win, like this massive, paradigm shifting victory for the conservation movement, for public lands, for public access, all that kind of stuff. I'm hearing folks talking about this in a similar context, like saying this is like the wildlife equivalent to the Great American Outdoors Act. If the GAO was all about this huge win for land, habitat access, the RAWA, or however we want to say the acronym, is like the wildlife complement to it. So we got the land protected. We have resources now to acquire and protect the land. Now we need resources to protect and manage the wildlife on it. Is that the right way to think about this? Like, is this that big of a deal?
Absolutely. That's almost exactly how we talk about it at BHA too. Great American Outdoors Act was phenomenal, and we worked on the Land and Water Conservation Fund for years, and we all have a shared victory to continue celebrating as, $900 million is dedicated annually to LWCF, and $9.5 billion over the next 5 years is being dedicated to infrastructure and deferred maintenance and all the great things that the Legacy Restoration Fund is going to fund. Now we get to do the exact same thing, but focus specifically on wildlife through the Recovering America's Wildlife Act. You're right, like RAWA is the acronym. We're not supposed to say that, by the way, so
okay.
Hopefully none of the important people are listening to this podcast.
Whoops.
We try and say the full thing because
it's just a
we
mouthful.
Want people to really it is a mouthful, and everyone slips, and we say RAWA all the time. But the reason why we try and force ourselves into saying the full thing is because you get to really remind yourself that we're covering America's wildlife. But that's so important, and being able to focus this amount of money in habitat enhancement through restoration, invasive species removal across all taxa, and look at research and watershed health and wildlife management across jurisdictional boundaries, that's awesome. And what a massive win, and something that's been hanging out there for so long. Like I mentioned in the beginning, we've invested a lot in big game species and charismatic megafauna, but there's a lot missing on the non-game side. And by doing so, we continue to invest in all the other wildlife species at the same time. So it's a great thing.
Yeah. Now, I know there's some folks out there, my fiscal conservative friends who see a $1.4 billion price tag and say, where's that going to come from? How are we going to pay for that? I know that over the years, as this idea has been proposed, that brought some concerns from the Republican side of the aisle as well. I see that with the recent introduction to the Senate, they've got a creative solution to funding this. Do you want to fill us in on that?
Yeah, for sure. So things are still kind of coming together around that. There's technically no specified what we call a pay for, how to offset the expense of the 1.4 billion, and it's not quite 1.4 billion, but when you add in the tribal side, we're getting close. So there's no specified pay for in the House bill, but in the Senate bill, there's a really creative pay for using what I'll quote as the amount of all civil or criminal penalties, fines, sanctions, forfeitures, or other revenues resulting from natural resource or environmental related violations or enforcement actions by any federal agency that are not directed to be deposited in a fund other than the general fund of the Treasury or have otherwise been appropriated. So that's it's a lot of specific technical jargon for the bill that essentially says we're going to make the criminals pay for it, which is awesome,
yeah.
right? So
who can argue with that?
Let's make the poachers pay for it. Who can not be in support of that?
Yeah.
So that's the working concept on the Senate side to help pay for this, and we're looking at what is called a manager's amendment in the House bill when it comes up for markup to see if we can essentially cut and paste the same pay for that I just described for the Senate bill and apply it for the House bill. And as we look at opposition in the House, you're right, most of it has been because of the price tag, but we're also getting some opposition back on the Senate side, the Environment and Public Works Committee, who we're working closely with to make sure that everyone's on board with this solution. They're not entirely fond of the pay for because it isn't brand new revenue coming in. So essentially we're shifting revenue that's going into general treasury without any specific earmark to a program and shifting it over there. and what they like to see is brand new revenue generated somehow for these types of offsets. I don't think that's mission critical. Finding new revenue is difficult and sometimes doesn't align as well. And I personally like the sort of poetic justice of taking that criminal penalty side of things. You're doing something especially criminal on the wildlife side of the equation, like poaching. If we can direct penalties and fines and forfeitures and things like that coming in through the wildlife side of the system, whether it's state level or U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, if it's coming into the U.S. Treasury, applying it to this seems like a really great way to achieve some justice for wildlife. Like, where it's impacting wildlife over here, we're taking what we've been able to recover in terms of criminal penalties and helping wildlife out over here. Like, there's a bit of poetic justice to it that I really love. And so I hope that we can keep that intact as it moves through both chambers.
Yeah, I think you couldn't write it up any better. I mean, that's perfect. Now, related to this whole funding debate, there's another side to this that I'm sure some people have brought up or maybe will, which kind of echoes some of the negativity that came out of proposals around the backpack tax, which, I know you know about. Folks have said, well, hey, if you are recreating on public lands, you should have to pay some kind of tax or fee, just like hunters and anglers do when we buy ammunition, or, we fund so much of conservation through our license sales, through the tax applied to our ammo and firearms equipment, et cetera, et cetera. So why shouldn't backpackers and bikers and those kind of people pay in too? And so that's been proposed, but some folks within the hunting and fishing community would look at that and say, actually, I don't want that, because when we hunters and anglers are the ones who pay for the majority of conservation work, we get a disproportionate percentage of the voice. We get a bigger seat at the table because we can say, hey, we paid for it all, so you got to listen to us when we talk about how to manage it. Do you think are there any people worried about that in this kind of case? Like, all of a sudden we're going to significantly increase the resource base and it's not as directly tied to hunters and anglers. Is that something we need to be worried about at all, or is that just overblowing something?
Well, you hear that, but I'm not sure how big a deal it really is, right? Like, I think if you ask any Fish and Wildlife agency about the need to diversify funding sources and revenue sources, everyone's kind of on the same page. Like, hunters and anglers have been shouldering the burden for far too long, and we don't have that much more to give. So we have to bring in other contributions from elsewhere. And, you could make the argument that it might disenfranchise hunters and anglers in the process slightly, but I think bringing in other stakeholders is generally a good thing. And you're not going to keep hunters and anglers from continuing to have probably the most important voice in management decisions along the way. The states know where their bread is buttered, so to speak, and license sales are still incredibly important. So I'm less concerned about that. And I think if we're thoughtful about implementation as these funding mechanisms get put into place, we can avoid that by being thoughtful up front and making sure that we avoid circumstances where that could even happen in the first place. And it's a way to bring in new revenue while maintaining sort of the proud legacy and tradition that hunters and anglers have already had in making their contributions. This is a way to I think, elevate that and to complement it in a new way that brings some serious money to the table. And we're supportive of exploring new revenue ideas too. Like we've floated this, backpack tax conversation lots of different ways with lots of different people. And it's complicated. If you talk to our friends in the outdoor industry, they're understandably really concerned about that. They're already being crushed by tariffs, and they can't afford to pay more on top of what they're already paying in their tariff structure. So how can we be creative about what maybe it's not a backpack tax, right? Maybe we're talking about tariff redirection. We're taking, existing tariffs and redirecting a portion of them to something like this, or we're working with our friends in the outdoor industry to reduce the tariffs they're they're paying and replacing that with some form of excise tax. There's, I think, a lot of clever ideas out there that we should explore with our friends in the outdoor industry to get to something like this. And there's a lot of interest in Congress on both sides of the equation. We've been hearing from Republicans and Democrats both. They're very interested in exploring what this looks like. I think it's just too premature to have it be a solution for Recovering America's Wildlife Act, but that doesn't mean that down the road it couldn't be, and we should continue looking for new revenue generation to support wildlife conservation in general. And certainly that's an additional solution that ultimately we could legislate into feeding Recovering America's Wildlife Act funds for state and tribal wildlife action plans, as much as, going to the Wildlife and Sport Fish Restoration Fund itself too. So lots of opportunities before us. And I think if we're careful not to close any doors or tie our hands behind our backs unnecessarily, we can leave those options on the table and get to a place that makes sense for everybody.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. So back to the Michigan example, potentially doubling the budget that these folks have to work with to make positive change on the ground. That's like world-changing kind of numbers there. How likely is this thing gonna happen? Like, is this a pipe dream still? Is this something that you think, like, with the right pushing and prodding, it's actually gonna happen? What's the timeline? Where do we stand with this thing? And should I be grabbing up my little party hats and that kind of thing, or what?
I think you should keep the party hats in the drawer, but within an arm's reach. We're a ways away from pushing this over the finish line. We feel very confident about it. However, there's August recess coming up. The House is getting ready to be wheels up and go back home to their districts tomorrow. The Senate is set to head out for their recess sometime later next week. After August recess, they have to come back in September and do a whole bunch of things, including getting a budget passed because the fiscal year ends at the end of September. Things like the Surface Transportation Authority expires, so they've got to authorize that again. And any leftover business related to what they call budget reconciliation and infrastructure deals and things like that could spill into September still. So there's a lot that needs to happen in the short term, but a lot of promise that indicates this might actually move in this Congress. And if it doesn't, then we're not that far away from the next Congress. And we see a lot of the leadership in place on this bill, ready to move it, very excited and motivated to move it. And with so much backing at the state level, I see it as a big win. As long as we can really get that pay for taken care of in the House bill, make sure our friends in the Environment and Public Works Committee on the Senate side are okay with this concept of a pay for. If we get that dialed in, that's really the biggest barrier to being able to get this bill a markup and hearings and ultimately floor votes to get it over the finish line and off to President Biden. So I would say it's realistic. It's not imminent in the short term, but it could happen by 2022. There's a chance that I think it could move at the end of this year if we were able to get things done quickly. So on congressional timelines, that's as close to light speed as you're going to get.
So back in 2016, 17, 18, 19, we were able to rally our community and kind of put the foot on the throat of the land transfer, at least the blatant land transfer type proposals and bills. And we kind of got that at least ostracized to the outskirts. We then, in 2020, we got the Great American Outdoors Act passed. And a lot of that, I think, came from the fact that we as a community and other outdoor recreators just made it politically impossible not to get behind something like this. It became a poison pill to be anti-public lands. It became, we simply forced the issue with putting constant pressure on these folks through whether it be the media or letters or phone calls or rallies. It seems to be a very clear correlation between the action of people listening to this podcast and others out there and people that care about this stuff and what actually happened. Like, it wasn't like these folks all of a sudden changed their minds and decided all of a sudden one day, you know what, I actually do care about the environment and public lands. No, they said, I want to keep my job. I want to get elected again. And we told them what they would need to do. So how do we, what do you think from your experience being inside a lot of this over the last 5 to 10 years? What can we learn from our wins over the last 5 to 10 years, last couple of years really? What can we learn from that and apply to this to make sure this happens too?
Well, Mark, the cynic in me says we can learn that no matter how well-meaning we are, that politics will always reign supreme over creating a sense of urgency in legislative deal-making, right? We saw the Great American Outdoors Act move quickly, one, because it was bipartisan nature, so there's some feel-good stuff there too. But it was also a super interesting political dynamic at play with some key Republicans in vulnerable seats and a Republican president working to make sure that those vulnerable Republicans had something like the Great American Outdoors Act to really run on, move some of those moderate votes, to your point about keeping their jobs. And so you had a really unpredictable political dynamic at play that really created the sense of urgency, thrust this to the finish line so quickly, and move the Great American Outdoors Act ahead. So I think there's always going to be that political piece of it too. And you referenced the whole public lands sell-off. When we saw Congressman Chaffetz from Utah introduce his land disposal bill, that wasn't a new bill. Like, that bill had been introduced before, but to credit your listeners, to credit all the great wildlife advocates out there that engaged, we just have a different technology platform than we ever have before. Activating people, informing people, and creating real-time communications across digital media spaces, is a whole new era for advocacy. And when BHA sort of lit the fuse on our end, and our friends and other conservation organizations did likewise, we were able to really capitalize on those connected digital networks to raise the alarm. And Congressman Chaffetz was relatively young and connected and using digital media himself. And so, we saw for the first time a member of Congress both yank back his bill and say withdraw it, but he did it on Instagram while holding his little hound dog. It was just like a classic image that's burned in so many of our memories, like with this pivotal moment where the entire hunting and fishing universe that cares about public lands and waters really beat up on him in a immediate way, so much so that he reeled back and withdrew his legislation, did it over Instagram and Facebook. And it was, I think, a sign of the times, a sign of change, but also a strong reminder that all of us still have an important role to play, and every phone call, every email you send still matters. We saw that play out with the Great American Outdoors Act as well. Despite some of the urgency created with the political dynamics I described, the most important thing that happened was that a lot of people cared about it, and members of Congress knew a lot of people back in their home states cared about it. And that's ultimately what thrust it over the finish line. And I think we could see something like that play out for Recovering America's Wildlife Act too. We don't have the unpredictable political dynamics at play, but we have the important part in place, which is a lot of people on both sides that care about this. Oh, and by the way, we have a whole bunch of state agencies and tribal nations really pushing this ahead all at the same time. So I might even argue and make the case that Recovering America's Wildlife Act has a stronger position to move this bill ahead than the Great American Outdoors Act had, because you have such a diversity of really influential stakeholders working together to make it happen. So I feel really positive about it, but also, it's good to point out that everyone can still make a difference, and the romance of our democracy is alive and well. And if I can communicate anything to you and your listeners, it's that's a good place to pin hope on, and I'm really excited about it.
Yeah. So what do you want us to do, John? What should we do in the short term to make sure this thing moves forward, even though it's early stages? And then what should we be watching for as the 5-alarm, red flashing light to really hammer down on it? What are the key times to look forward to in the future as well?
After we get back from August recess, we should know more as Congress makes decisions. They start calendaring things at the committee level for hearings and markups and things like that. But the best way to stay abreast of that is to go to the Alliance website, the Alliance for America's Fish and Wildlife, at ournatureusa.com, and find your favorite hunting and fishing or conservation organization listed there, and find the one you're a member of. If you're a member of Backcountry Hunters and Anglers, come to our website. We have an action alert set up supporting the legislation. It doesn't have to be us. Find your favorite one. Go take action through their action system. Pick up the phone. Call your senators in your home states. Call your member of Congress in whatever district you live in, and let them know this is an important piece of legislation for you and that you want to see them support it, move ahead, and elevate a sense of urgency with their party leadership in the House or the Senate, whoever you're calling. And we'll keep you posted as things move. Our friends at the Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies are doing a great job of monitoring this and writing herd on it. And there's a lot of ways that I think people can engage and participate that way, but you have to connect with an organization that you're aligned with, that you're a member of, so you can have a place to stay up to speed on these things and move ahead. And I would give a shout out to the National Wildlife Federation here too. They've been leading the charge on state wildlife action plans and funding for those for a long time. I used to work there myself and did a lot of fly-ins supporting it. And so they've been an important partner, really helping lead the charge here. Congressional Sportsmen's Foundation is doing a lot. So check out their website. There are a lot of places people can stay up to speed on it, but the fact that I just mentioned National Wildlife Federation, Congressional Sportsmen's Foundation in the same sentence shows you the breadth of people engaged and supportive in leading the way on this.
Yeah, it's a beautiful thing, and I'm excited to be there with all the rest of the listeners and hunters and anglers out there hoping to get this thing across the finish line. So, John, unless there's anything else you want to mention, I think we've got our marching orders.
I appreciate it so much, Mark. Thanks for finding some time to talk about this. It's outstanding. I can't applaud your enthusiasm enough, so I'm grateful for the chance to connect with you and your listeners.
Absolutely. Hopefully we can talk again here soon with an update and good news on the horizon.
I look forward to it. We'll be there to let you know all about it.
Now, a lot of you guys are familiar with the old hunting tradition of eating, some organ, the heart or a chunk of liver off the first animal you kill. I had that when I was a little kid, and it was a big deal. Organ meats were always prized by frontier people who knew the importance of getting a lot of different minerals and nutrients. And as often is the case, those guys were onto something, because organs are among the most nutrient-rich foods on the planet. And you can get the same benefits your ancestors craved via convenient daily capsules from Heart and Soil, made exclusively from regeneratively raised, grass-fed, and finished cattle. Heart and Soil's unique freeze-drying process means all those important nutrients are trapped in, ensuring you experience every one of the benefits of nature's superfood in a clean, convenient, taste-free capsule. Find out more at heartandsoil.co, and make sure to use code MeatEater for 10% off your purchase. That's heartandsoil.co. Use the code MeatEater. There's nothing like snook hook sets at dawn or catching a tarpon in the moonlight. Find your next fishing trip made easy on fishingbooker.com and experience the magic of the Sunshine State or any other destination on your fishing bucket list. Book a blue water adventure in search of sailfish or go snapper fishing with the kids. With over 6,000 captains and trips to choose from, planning your next one just got a whole lot easier. Download the Fishing Booker app on the Google Play or App Store, or visit them online at fishingbooker.com to book your trip today.
All right, and now we're going to get to part 2 of the episode with Mike over at Heartland Bowhunter. We're going to run him through the What Would You Do gauntlet. Here we go. All right, with me now on the line, I've got Michael Hunsucker from Heartland Bowhunter. Mike, how are you?
What's up, man? Long time no talk.
I know. I'm glad we're getting to do this. I think the last time that you were on the main show, I know you've been on some of the Rut Fresh Radio stuff, but the last time you were on the main show was the very first year of the podcast. Do you remember this?
Wow.
I think you and Sean came on and we talked photography and different stuff like that. And that would have been 2014, I think. Isn't that crazy?
Time flies, man.
Yeah, it doesn't feel that long ago. Part of me thinks it doesn't feel that long ago. Part of me feels like it was a lifetime ago. But yeah, a lot's changed since then.
We've had children since then, and that usually makes things a big blur.
Yeah, that's the truth. So how old are you? You got 2 boys, right? How old are they now?
Yeah, I got 2 boys. Camden, who's almost 8. He'll be 8 in a couple weeks, and then Noah's 5. So really getting into that fun stage. I kind of have enjoyed all the different stages, but as they get older, you just are able to do more with them, and especially with our lifestyles, it just makes it easier with the travel, with the stuff outdoors and everything. They really enjoy it. So
yeah, definitely. I've experienced the same thing with our boys are 3.5 and 1.5 now, and it's still real challenging in a lot of ways. But just get creative about ways to get them out there and keep them involved and make it a family thing. And it's been good. But no shortage of I don't know, interesting disasters. I think it's
just different, right? It's a completely different experience.
Yeah, that's the truth. Well, what I was wanting to do today, Mike, is run you through something I've started to do with a handful of people, and I call it my What Would You Do gauntlet. So the idea here is that I'm going to present to you a specific situation, like a very specific set of hypothetical circumstances. Like, you're in this place at this time and this thing's happening. What would you do? And then the idea is to try to have you explain to me how you would take, what you would do, why you would do it, how you'd handle that situation, and kind of talk through your thought process and what steps you would take. It's just kind of a different way for us to get a glimpse into your mind and your deer hunting approach and all that. So that's what I want to throw at you. The question is, are you game for that?
Absolutely. I'm always game for whatever.
So then I'm going to be tough.
You may not like the answer, but I'll give you one.
That's all I can ask for. I'm going to throw the most devastating doozies I can think of as far as tough situations, and then we'll see how you'll handle it. And then there might be a couple softballs in here for you too. But I think it should be fun.
Right on.
And then, we'll wrap it up with some rapid fire questions. I want to hear a little bit about what's new with Heartland Bowhunter. And then I'll send you on your way and we can start getting ready for hunting season.
Right on, man. Sounds good.
So here's what I want to start with, Mike. I want to kind of begin with the off season, kind of where we are right now. So let's say it's August 5th and you are at a random diner somewhere in Missouri, and a random friend of a friend comes up to you and he says, hey, I have this big family farm. We used to have some guys that were leasing it. They just pulled out. They can't do it anymore. It's a great spot. You've heard about it. It's a great spot. And he wants you to pick up the lease and pay for it. And, he needs that money for his family. And he knows you're into deer hunting, so we'd love for you to pick up the lease. But he says, hey, I'll give you the first year for free because I think you're going to like it so much. Come on out, check this place out, and then see if you're interested in going from there. So you're presented the situation, but it's August 5th. and opening day in Missouri is September 15th, right? So you've got
Yeah.
5.5 weeks, something like that. So my question is, in that situation and everything else you got going on, A, would you take him up on this deal, assuming that you've heard of this place and you know it's pretty dang good? And then B, assuming you do take it, what would you do in that 5-week period? What are the most important things you would do in the next couple weeks right away to get started so late in the game in a new place?
Yeah, no, I'm never one to say no to a new piece of property. So it seems like you can never have too many options, especially when one gets stale and you've been hunting a specific, property and things aren't going your way. Sometimes it's good to just, take a break, take the pressure off that property and jump onto something else. And so, August 5th, yeah, a little late in the game as far as, prepping for the upcoming season, but also not too late for, even if you want to do some food plots. So, my number one thing would be obviously to kind of take a look at the property, from the outside in at first, and learn as much as you can about what's available as far as food, cover, and water, and see what limited resources there might be, and try to improve upon those as much as possible in a short window. We're like right now we are gearing up, for a lot of the fall plot stuff, and you can plant fall plots as early as like August 5th. You can plant them that early. You just need to get the moisture and the rain. And so what we do is typically we'll kind of prep everything this time of year and then just wait for the right time to plant. But anyway, yeah, I mean, I think, number one, just kind of, look at the maps, overview of the property, kind of try to figure out, what ways you might be able to improve it in that short window of time. And then, another thing I probably would like to do would be to, obviously get cameras out as soon as possible. Fortunately, in Missouri, we can run cellular cameras. So if that's an option, they've been, I mean, they're just a game changer as far as intrusion, and getting in on a property. And so, get some cameras out, find out what quality of deer are there, kind of what areas they're at, where they're focusing on, and and then beyond the food plots and the cameras, obviously getting a few stand sites up. Hanging new stands can be pretty disturbing, and so if you can get that done prior to season, to where you can give them time to settle and cool off and let the deer get accustomed to stuff, then that's a good time to do it. So I think, I've always talked about when I hunt a new property, I love hunting in like a brand new property. For me, it's just like something exciting about learning something new. I mean, it's fun to hunt, traditional properties that and you've been hunting for years, but I love just jumping into a new piece of property and learning everything I can about it. So I always like to kind of start from the outside and work my way in, kind of be not too intrusional in the beginning, and just scouting is a great thing right now. So in the Midwest, soybeans, as are kind of the key of the summer, the summer bean,
Yes.
the summer food source for the big bucks.
The best.
So this time of year is a great time to scout from the road, or, pop into a field last couple hours of daylight and with the wind in your favor, and kind of glass with a spotting scope and some binoculars and really get a pattern on deer. They're just so patternable this time of year. They're so regular, and they're super visible. So, I honestly, like August 5th, you say, gives you, a little over, a month basically to figure things out. But I think that's ample time to really get dialed in if you needed to.
When you say, at the very beginning, you said you got to scout it and figure out where the cover, where the food is, etc. At this period, what would your scouting look like other than the glassing, like the long distance scouting? But what about like on the ground, pounding out the miles? Would you walk every square inch so you know it, or is it too late and you don't want to do that, 5 weeks before the season? What would that like specifically look like as far as trying to learn what's actually there on the ground?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think you can do that and get away with it, and obviously you disturb it short term. Um, I don't know that you have that much to gain as far as like diving into the timber and like trying to find like rut spots. Like I save that for later in October when or even in November when the sign is going to be so much more prevalent. You're going to have the scrapes, you're going to have the rubs, you're going to have all that, and so. Really, for me in an early season in Missouri, I'm hunting fringes anyways. I'm hunting food, and that's basically it. We're not hunting mornings much. We're not diving into the timber. We're hunting food plots. We're hunting, soybeans. Basically, fringe type stuff to where you can get in and out easily, and you're not going to disturb deer because that's the thing. I mean, I love hunting. That first week of Missouri season has been my most effective week of the season for targeting like a specific buck. And it's one of those situations where it's easy to get excited, right? It's the opening week of season and like you want to get out there and hunt as much as you can. But I've kind of learned over the years, like it's really better if you're really trying to target one specific buck to just play your cards right, wait for the conditions to be right, and then make your move. And rather than basically quality sits over quantity.
Yeah. So then you mentioned that a lot of what you like to do at that time of year is revolve around that food. Is it safe to assume, and you mentioned this is one of the things, but when I'm thinking of 5 weeks, very little prior knowledge, and also you need a quick bang for your buck, is that likely the very first and most important habitat project you would take in a situation like this? Not knowing much else about the property, let's just assume it's like your average Missouri property. Maybe it's half crops, it's half timber and a couple draws, that kind of deal. Assuming that generic situation, is it safe to say, like, if there's a spot to put them in, you're going to put something in? And then secondly, what would that thing be? What do you think would be your quick bang for your buck, last minute plot of choice for this kind of situation?
Yeah, I think that'd be the focus out of the gate. You're not going to jump in and do any timber stand improvement or doze off any places or build water hole. I mean that's kind of long term planning type stuff. And so when you're talking about bang for your buck, I mean I really like planting brassicas, whether it's turnips or radishes, different blends. They're really easy to establish, and it's a very small seed, so you don't need a ton of equipment. So if you don't have all the equipment, it's not a big deal. If you can get that seed to soil contact on bare dirt, then you can get a food plot established. I absolutely love clover plots, and you'll find us hunting clover a lot during the early season. But as far as this time frame now, you can plant some fall clover plots and the clover will get established, but it takes some time. So you're not going to get that lush clover plot planting it right now in the fall. So my go-to would for sure be a brassica blend of sorts. I really like the radishes a lot. I like radish blends. It seems like that they hit the radishes a little earlier in the year than the turnips, but it really depends. I mean, everybody talks about that, if you plant, turnips, they're going to eat the leaves prior to the frost. And then once the hard frost, then they'll start eating the bulbs and all that stuff. And I think it just really depends on the farm, the deer, the food sources available, and whatnot. So, we have some properties that are super high deer numbers and, the food may be a little more limited and they will devour turnip or brassica, whatever, like September 15th opening day, like they're eating them. And, so, it just kind of depends. But and then we've had properties too, lower deer densities, and they won't touch them until later in the winter when all the other food's gone and snow comes in. And so it just really depends on the deer and how many deer there are on the property, what they're used to, et cetera, the other available food sources. So, yeah. But this is a great, easy to establish plot. I feel like is those smaller seed type plots as opposed to planting grain. You're too late now for corn or soybeans or any of that stuff.
Yeah, it's hard to go wrong with brassicas, like you said. Now, what about the stand prep? You mentioned hanging a few stands before the season gets going. Would those first stands that you work on be those kind of edge spots that you talked about to focus on for the early season, or are you wanting to get your rut spots, some potential rut spots hung now so you don't need to go in there at all ever again until November 1 or whatever? How are you going to prioritize which locations you set up?
Yeah, I mean, for sure, the first focus would be some observation type stands. And even ones, you could hang these stands and sit in them, to observe this time of year, observe the movement of the deer, and then kind of dial in. Like I said, you're not going to cause too much disturbance right now, but I would definitely get some observation stands hung in some areas where, you can at least have a starting point. And then if you do learn from your summer scouting, an area of say that these deer are really coming out of this corner of this bean field and they're focused in this little pocket, maybe hang a stand, somewhere close to there where you're going to be, somewhere within bow range, hopefully. Like I said, I wouldn't be too gung ho about diving in and looking for like a primo rut spot necessarily. Although, just because, like I said, that's the scrapes, the rubs, the sign is not nearly as prevalent. Everything's overgrown this time of year. Although there are some pretty obvious spots occasionally on certain, farms and properties where the topography and the timber pinches down, or where there might just be these great looking rut funnel type spots. And I would not be afraid to jump in and hang a stand in one of those spots just to have, something as an option. But like I said, I mean, I travel and hunt quite a bit, hunt some new properties, and a lot of times I'm hanging my stands, in the middle of the hunt, in the middle of the rut, and being minimally, invasive as far as like what you're trimming and cutting stuff down. And I've actually found a lot of success, like first time in on a stand. You hang it and jump in and have a lot of success. So that time of year too, the rut's starting to gear up. The bucks are a little more tolerable to getting bumped around a little bit. So it's just like you can get away with a little more that time of year.
Yeah. So back to the summer scouting stuff real quick. And imagine we're leading into the season, and for whatever reason, I told you that you get to have one night of summer glassing the entire summer. You only get one night. And if you don't spot a shooter buck on that one night of glassing, you can't hunt at all. I don't know why this would be the case, but let's just say this is the case. Well, I present the situation because I want to understand like what the best situation for spotting a mature buck in the summer would be in your eyes. Because there's a lot of folks that maybe don't have a whole lot of time to get away for this kind of thing, right? They've got kids, they've got the day job, and they can maybe get out just a couple times a summer. Maybe the property they're hunting in the rut or whatever it is, they've got to drive 5 hours to get to. So they have to be choosy about the weekend that they choose to do this. So what would be the ideal scenario for you to get eyes on, what your hopeful shooter buck would be in the summer? What kind of place would you look for? Specifically, like the ideal scenario, what kind of day, weather, what kind of location would you pick to watch this spot? Fill me in on how you would handle that.
Well, I mean, yeah, in a perfect world, obviously evenings on the bean field. If you can find, I feel like those big mature deer tend to, especially in areas where there's, pressure or, road traffic, whatever. Like I feel like they tend to hang near the more secluded fields, where they can feel comfortable, fields that are maybe close to, good cover. And so I think that's kind of where I would start as far as like trying to locate a shooter deer is, where is there food that's close to, really good cover that is secluded away from, pressure. And so that's kind of where I would start. And then, when it comes to like picking a time frame, like, August, we're getting, into August, they're pretty well full grown. They're just kind of finishing up. So like if you get too excited and get out there in, June or even early July, they're not taking too much shape yet. So you really won't know a whole lot about them, but they're by August, they're pretty well full grown. And so, the one tricky thing I feel like from my experience is the weather. A lot of times I feel like as hunters naturally, like during season, we're like anticipating that like cool off, that cold front, that high pressure. And from my experience, like summer velvet, like August time frame, sometimes I feel like will screw a deer up. And like, I don't know why. Maybe it's just that it shifts his pattern a little bit and it changes his mindset and he starts thinking about the fall and does something different. I don't know. But for me, I like in a picture perfect world, if I'm like trying to say I'm going to go out and scout and try to video this buck I've been getting pictures of, consistency is more important in my opinion than a big change in weather. I think if you get a boost like right now today, it's going to be 100 degrees here in Missouri where I'm at. Tonight would not be a night that I would want to be in the field, nor what I think would be great, for deer movement. But if it was, going to be in 90s like it has been, or 85, whatever, consistent weather, I think produces kind of consistent, results in the deer.
Huh. That's a really interesting point. One I hadn't thought about, but when I look back on summer sightings, there's something to be said about that. That's really interesting.
Because I just remember early on, like, oh yeah, like this cold front's coming through, like let's go out and like, let's go try to film some velvet bucks, and then like you don't see hardly much at all. You're like, what's going on? Like, I don't know. I don't know if this is something that other people experience or not, but that's just kind of Sean and I have always talked about that, how, you anticipate cold fronts coming during the season, but like even early season a little bit, I feel like a big cold front can kind of be a little wacky.
Yeah, I've certainly seen, when there's that consistent warm weather and you're thinking, they wouldn't want to move and it's so hot like this, and bam, there they are. They're there night after night. So something to it maybe. What about this one? And this is something that I wouldn't wish on my worst enemy, but I'm going to wish it on you for the moment. Imagine you have a property that for whatever reason you could not get out to see at all after you planted your food plots. So you planted your, mid-August, late August, whatever time frame it is, you got those brassicas or whatever you planted in the ground. You can't get back to the property until September 14th. So it's the night before opening day. You're heading in to try to get your opening day hunt. You've got the weekend, whatever it is. You get there that night and you glass the area and you see that all of your food plots, literally everyone, has failed. There was a drought. It's just dirt fields. You've got nothing planted that you put in. Nothing's alive and green and kicking. What would you do for that first weekend hunt? How would you handle that situation, knowing nothing else?
Well, that's like you said, you wouldn't wish it on anybody, but that's a pretty normal thing for people. I feel like even for us, we've I'm trying to think. It's probably been 3 years ago. We got no rain. We planted and got like a tiny little bit of rain, and then nothing afterwards. And so the food plots were just trashed. And so, because crazy enough, Sean and I went up to hunt. I want to say, it was opening weekend, and the plots were terrible. We literally tilled them up and replanted them. We had some rain coming. So it was like September 15th. And so like we knew that these plots weren't going to produce like bulbs or whatever. But like as far as like any sort of forage, we were like, all right, we're going to plant them in turnips and at least they'll have the leaves to browse on. And so that's what we did. We planted the food plot opening day of our opening weekend of Missouri season, and actually ended up coming back like 2 weeks later, very end of September, and killed a buck over one of those food plots.
Wow.
So
nice.
He was coming in. They were just very, the turnips were really, really fresh growth, but they were browsing on them and kind of just picking through them as they were going out towards the destination field. So, it's not uncommon that it's just a gamble this time of year, obviously, especially in the Midwest. It's just hot and it's dry, and the rain's come in spurts, and so timing it is key, like I said. And sometimes you can do everything in your power to get it done, and it still doesn't work out. So, but back to kind of your question of like how to handle that. Like, not everybody's going to go in and replant their food plots and till them up, but hopefully in that case, like you said, there are other food sources available. And you could focus on those food sources. The Midwest is, corn, soybeans. We have a lot of mature oaks, a lot of acorns. And so there's a lot of food and browse, readily available for deer. So it just may kind of change up your strategy a little bit. And you may have to kind of, refocus your efforts on the existing food sources and the other food sources that are available. One thing worth mentioning that's more applicable to late season, but a lot of guys, like I said, don't have the equipment or the ability to plant corn and soybeans and row crops, that type of stuff. But one thing that we've done in the past is, and actually we still do on certain properties where, it just doesn't justify us coming in and planting our own grain plots, is, we will buy the grain off of the farmer. And so if a farmer's planting, a 100-acre field and we want him to leave 2 acres in soybeans, like when he goes and harvests the beans, we know kind of the average of the field, and we'll actually just buy those beans from him. And that's, for us, time is just a limited resource. And so it's well worth it rather than us trying to plant our own grain plots on all of our properties all across the board. So that's something that I would encourage people to consider and at least talk to the landowner, talk to the farmer, and consider that, because late season, that is absolutely a game changer in Missouri.
Yeah, I bet. So you found farmers pretty open to that kind of thing, because I guess it saves them time anyways as well. If they get paid and they don't need to harvest it, that's kind of a win for them too, maybe. Right.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, saves them a little bit of time for the harvest, and at the end of the day, they're getting the same amount of revenue, and so it works out well.
Yeah. Okay. I like it.
And then some of us, like on our main property in Missouri that Sean's dad actually owns, and so basically that farmer cash rents from him, and then he just basically takes that out of the cash rent payment or whatever, just decreases it. And so there's always ways to work it out, but I think a lot of people having those conversations with the farmers may change things. And Missouri is very interesting, because after the rifle season in Missouri, man, it's just a different world. It's a different world here in Missouri. Like I remember just growing up, like thinking like I got to get my archery buck killed before gun season, because afterwards it's just such a tough deal. But if you have standing grain and standing food, that can really, really change the game.
Yeah. Ditto here in Michigan. So one more preseason situation I want to run you by, and I think this is something you'll be able to relate to from some past years of hunting that I know you've had with some of these deer. Imagine you've got a target buck who's eluded you for several years. Let's say there's been 2 years. He was 4, and then he was 5, and both years he slipped through your fingers, weren't able to get him killed. Now it's year 3 with this deer. He's a 6.5-year-old. And you're going into the off season thinking like, this is the deer. This is the only deer this year that I really want to kill. Given the history, the close calls, he's a stud. What would you do in the off season different than everything else we've discussed already? Like, what unique tweaks would you make if you knew you were preparing for that one deer?
So yeah, we've definitely had these situations and scenarios, and I feel like every year, I mean, like you mentioned, you may not have had an opportunity at this deer, but like we're running cameras, we're seeing them on the hoof, we're learning more and more every year. And like we're kind of starting to put those pieces to the puzzle together. And the more that you learn about this deer, you learn about his habits, his frequencies, his home range, what he prefers, different times a year. I mean, it's unbelievable the amount of information that we gather just through observation and trail cameras. And that's what for me, I mean, that's what it's all about, is that whole process of people that don't hunt and that don't, necessarily manage deer or follow deer year after year don't quite get, but it's just like, I mean, they're smart. They're very smart, and they're hard to kill. And fooling one at his own game is kind of the ultimate prize. And so, but like you said, even if you may not have a chance at them, you're still learning, gathering this information. And so going into the season, I kind of like to look back and say, okay, like where have we seen this deer the most? Where are we getting pictures of him the most? Let's kind of like map out his core area. And we've done it to a lot of times to where, all right, this is this deer's core area. He really like hammers the brassicas, or he really hammers the clover. Let's get something established close to his core area where he's bedding, where he's spending a lot of his time. And we've actually set up spots and food plots specifically for a specific buck, just because we've learned so much about them and really want to go all in on them. So I know that it's been really effective for us in the past. I mean, killing a mature deer is difficult enough as it is, but if you can, put the food that he prefers close to the area that he prefers to bed, and get your setup in a spot where you can get in and catch the proper wind and pull it off, it can be extremely effective. Actually, Ty Easley, who's on our show and films with us quite a bit, he actually killed I believe it was his biggest Missouri buck to date last year, and it was 180-inch deer, just a giant from Missouri. And he had actually, just like I was talking about, had been hunting this deer, had been like kind of watching him. He he was 5 last year, so the year before he was 4. He was going to hunt him. He decided not to let him go one more year, but even then he was paying attention to his patterns, and watching them and figuring everything out. And so he actually came in, cleared off this area, and planted a clover plot, frost seeded it in the spring, and then came back and overseeded it in the fall. It was just lush, just perfect, and it was really close to where this deer liked to bed. And coming into season, he wasn't really, really consistent on this clover plot. And so he was trying to figure out, man, like, I don't know when I want to hunt him. Like, he hasn't been consistent enough for me to hunt. But then he's like, man, then all of a sudden, boom, he shows up in daylight. And so he's like, man, I just don't know exactly what to do. And he started looking into it, and he started looking at the weather patterns and compared those to the times when the buck was showing up in daylight. And he actually went back to the weather history and looked. And what he found was, when that deer was daylighting in the evening, it was when the wind was out of the east in the morning. And so when that buck went to bed in the morning, and when the wind was out of the east, was when he would bed really close to that food plot. And so he would come and feed in it that evening. One of the tough parts is the easterly wind was to the buck's advantage. So it was not a great wind for the stand he was hunting him out of. He really wanted like a north wind, is what he set his stand up for. And so he kind of watched and observed and kind of, played it safe. And then he finally got the weather. He hunted a couple times, didn't see him. And then, a few days later, got the weather perfect to where it was actually an east wind in the morning, switching to a north wind in the evening.
Nice. And
he was able to slip in there, and sure enough, the buck showed up and he shot him. Shot him right in that food plot that he built for him. So not much more rewarding than when you like really, figure out all that information and you really put all that together. And I don't know, it's just cool because like there is a science to it. There's a rhyme and a reason for everything that the whitetail deer does. And, I know that when I initially got started archery hunting, like that was not something that I ever thought about, right? You're just diving in, you're hunting, and of course you get lucky, and of course during the rut, anything can happen. And so like you kill deer and you learn and you figure it out, but like really dialing in and really patterning a deer is pretty cool.
I love that. I love when you can get that deep into it. I kind of like this scenario you painted with Ty. So I'm curious how you would handle something like this. Let's say you've got back to this target buck circumstance. So we've got this buck you've been after forever. He's the one. But all through, like, let's say you saw him in the summer. You knew he was there. You knew he was alive. He was around. Maybe you got one picture of him in September, so he stuck around once we got into the fall. But now he's disappeared. He's just nocturnal, very infrequent on your cameras and nocturnal only. And that continues. That continues to the beginning of the season. And it just keeps on going. You're getting 0 daylight pictures of him. You've had 0 daylight sightings of him. There's been some nights that you couldn't hunt, but you got out on a hilltop and you glassed, couldn't see him, nothing. At what point, assuming 0 daylight pictures and 0 daylight sightings, at what point would you take a stab at him, like an aggressive stab at him? Are you going to wait all the way till the rut? Again, assuming no daylight sign at all, would you let that keep you out of the good stuff all the way to the rut, or would you take a stab if a cold front pushed through in mid-October or early October or late October? What would be the thing that would finally make you say, okay, even though there's no picks, I got to try because this thing is here, this date or this weather or this whatever? What would that take?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to say. Like early season cold fronts can be insane, and they can really flip the switch for deer, and so things can happen to where you may not be seeing a deer for a long time and not getting pics, and then all of a sudden, boom, he's there. But also on the flip side, like when you're just explaining that scenario to me, like in my head, I'm thinking like, I talk to a lot of people who are like, yeah, I got this buck and he's just nocturnal. He's coming to the camera, but he's not moving in daylight. And I a lot of times I have to say, well, you got to think about the situation, and is he really nocturnal, or is he just not living on your farm? Is he just living on the neighbors and he's coming in the middle of the night? And that's the case more often than not, in my opinion. I just don't think there's that many like purely nocturnal bucks out there, unless they're in extremely high pressured, public land situations, or even high pressured, private land where a lot of people are hunting different properties, and he's kind of getting pressured from all angles. Like there's got to be a pretty good reason that a deer's completely nocturnal. Most deer, I don't care how old they are. I mean, if they're not messed with and pressured, they're going to get up and feed in the daylight, whether it be the last 20 minutes or the last hour and a half of daylight. So I always like to ask that question, like, do you think you know where he's living? Do you think he's actually living close, bedding close, but just not showing up in daylight, or do you think he's just venturing from a long ways away? And so, I'm trying to think. I've had bucks that from running cameras year after year that literally will shed their velvet, and they'll hold on, they'll hang around for a little bit. But I had these two bucks that hung together, and one of them was a really, really big deer. And every single year, I think I had him up to like 7 years old. And every single year, actually, no, he was like 9. He was like 9 years old.
Jeez.
And every single year he would leave. And I'm not kidding you. It'd be like September 13th, September 14th. I think one year was September. Like I had one picture in the morning of the 15th, but never again. And then one year I think he was 9 years old, just an absolute monarch of a buck. Like it was definitely out of his prime. In his prime, he was probably 180s, and he was like probably now down to 160s, but just a beast. And I'll never forget, I checked this trail camera and I was like, oh my God, he was on here in daylight this morning, walking through this natural funnel, early season funnel spot. And I was like, I got to get in there and hunt tonight. It was like September 18th or 19th. It was the latest he had stayed on the property. And I shit you not, man, we got in the tree and here comes this buck. And I'm like, oh my God, like we're going to kill him. He's walking right down this trail. And he's just literally coming right to us. Like, this is perfect. He's got like 2 other bucks with him. Skylar's filming me, and he gets to like 35 yards, and he's quartered to me, but he's walking down this trail. So I'm getting ready to draw because he's going to be broadside at 30. And so like, I just put tension on the string and I'm just getting ready to draw. And up from behind him comes this younger buck and just rams him right in the ass.
No.
Like starts poking him with his head, and the buck runs off and like bounds off to like 70 yards, stops and like looks back, looks around, and then just kind of walks off out towards the destination field, but not to where I would have any shot. And never saw him again. Never got another picture of him again. Actually, a guy I know ended up finding him dead on the property that he would leave mine to go to. He found him dead that following year. And so that was like probably one of the most like heartbroken moments of my like hunting career ever. I feel like just a chance at a monarch like that. And then like dead to rights. Like I was just calm, just like, okay, here we go. This is going to happen. Let's do this. And just to have something completely out of your control, blow it. Just like, so frustrating.
That's crazy. So what about this? What about a situation with a similar outcome, but different cause, which is, let's say that buck's coming in and the little buck behind him doesn't ram him. He walks right into 30 yards. You draw back, you put the pin on him and you let go, but you miss him. You miss him dead to rights. He takes off. You've been watching this buck for years and years and years, and your opportunity is blown. Like, how do you handle that? How do you mentally handle that? Are you the type that just, all right back at it. I'm back in the tree tomorrow. getting after it, or do you take some time and just need to take a couple days and get your head right and do some shooting and make sure you're confident again? Like, what's that look like for you mentally and physically, I guess?
Yeah, I mean, I'm about as optimistic of a person as you'll find for the most part, and so like I'm always just like, all right, like you just got to get back after it and give it a shot, but it can be extremely mentally taxing, and I mean, let's be real, bow hunting can be a complete mental game. It is a mental game as much as it is anything, honestly, and that's something that I think just through my personality and demeanor, number one, but then also through experience. Have been able to really handle those emotions and that excitement, that energy, really well. And I'm just lucky that I'm able to do that. I mean, I kind of get really hyper focused in that moment. I don't get nervous. I don't get like to where I feel like I need to rush to make stuff happen. Like I feel really calm and really focused in those moments. Whereas a lot of people I know are the opposite, where they'll get flustered and they make decisions they shouldn't make. They won't pick a spot and they'll pull the trigger and just get caught up in the moment. And let's be real. I mean, that excitement and energy is why we're all so hooked on it. And so, but for me, I'm able to really harness that until I pull the trigger. And then the second I pull the trigger is when I get the big rush of emotion. But, there really isn't, I don't know, just confidence is everything, I think, really. Just being confident, and that starts with practice. That starts with, shooting a lot to where your arrow is going to fly where you want it to go, and it starts with equipment. Having the equipment set up properly, understanding the equipment, especially in a world now where, I mean, these bows are very complex. The equipment we use is complex, and so understanding it, having it set up properly, tuned properly, and just building that confidence, I think is where it really, really pays off dividends.
Yeah. So fast forwarding a little bit then. I know you do a lot of hunts where you're traveling all across the country, hitting this spot, hitting that spot. So you show up somewhere and you've got a week or something, and you've got to figure it out quick. And let's say this is like a buddy's farm that they've allowed you access to the farm, but you don't have a history there. And they're not going to help you out much because they've got their own thing going on. I don't know, maybe this is like a situation when you go hunt with the Lindsays or something where you show up and you have access, but you're on your own. And let's say it's late October, maybe October 25th, and you've got 5-6 days to hunt. You arrive on day one. What I'm curious is, how do trail cameras factor into what you're going to be doing? Like, do you have an immediate, like, day one, midday, I'm going to go hang 6 cameras in these types of places right away? Is something like that on your agenda? Or if not, what do you do? Like, what does your trail camera situation look like specifically in that scenario, if you do at all?
Yeah, no, that's a pretty regular scenario for me. And I've done it both ways to where, like when I've hunted with the Lindsays in the past, like, I usually will hunt like one of Jeff's farms that they don't spend a lot of time on, but they have cameras on. And so like my number one thing is like, all right, let me go check the cameras, because I can pull those cards and I can learn so much about what's happened the past week. That's really all that matters in my, that time of year. Like, what's going on this past week? What deer are hitting what areas? What, where deer are focused. And so like in that situation, that's an ideal situation for me. Is there's cameras out. I can grab those cards right now and learn everything that's been going on the past week, and I can make my decisions based on that. On the other hand, like if it's a situation where it's a property, there are not cameras out yet, late October, that time of year, I still am going to do everything I can to get cameras out as fast as I can, because as soon as you get them out, the quicker you can start gathering information and learning. And that time of year is like literally my favorite time of year to run trail cameras, because the deer are just smashing the scrapes. And so scrapes are where all of our cameras are for the most part. I'd say 90% of them are on scrapes that time of year. And you just learn so much about, what bucks are hitting what scrapes and what areas. And even when like you get later into the month of November, you start to see when bucks come out of lockdown. Like bucks might disappear for 3 days, and then boom, they're hitting a scrape and that deer is not with a doe, and you have a window of opportunity to chase that buck before he does find another doe and get locked down. And so I definitely would get trail cameras out as quick as possible, but also without being too intrusive, right? Because you can obviously cause more damage than good. Fortunately, a lot of those scrapes that bucks are hitting and stuff are on the edge of fields, and some of the more the bigger social scrapes may be in the timber in different areas, but you can definitely get away with getting some cameras out without being too intrusive and learning a lot in a short amount of time.
What's your ideal way to do that? Like, is it the first midday that you get to? You're going to go out there at lunch and drive a truck around and hit find your 6 best or 4 best or however many field edge scrapes that look good and put something up? Or are you putting up cameras when you walk out to hunt for the first time? Or what's that specifically look like?
Maybe a little bit of both. It just depends on the property, obviously. There's a really unique property that I've hunted the past 2 seasons in Colorado that is on the eastern plains of Colorado. It's a whitetail property, so it's more like western Kansas type habitat, but river bottoms and just a great, really great like rut type of farm. And it actually has they have water wells all over this ranch, and there's people that are checking the wells pretty regularly. So the deer are actually like conditioned to a little bit of vehicle traffic. And so there's also a levee that runs along all the length of the river for the most part. And so with that property, what I did the very first time I hunted it, I literally just went along that levee, which is the levee. There's a road on the levee, and those guys drive that road maybe once or twice a day. Maybe not the inner levee every time, but there's an outer levee too. But anyway, like the deer are a little bit, so they're a little bit conditioned to vehicle traffic, so they're not going to like blow out of their bed or like freak out if they see a truck. And so I went along that levee and I found all these trails where the deer were crossing the levee, and I put cameras on like 6 different trails. And so I knew that was, and in Colorado you can't use cellular cameras, and so I knew that'd be an easy way for me I can just jump in the truck, drive that levee, pull cards, and check the cameras, every couple of days or however often. But then, you might have a situation with a farm where, it's not as accessible with a vehicle without causing too much disturbance. And so in those situations, we definitely have spots where we put trail cameras near stands that we don't check those trail cameras unless we're like going to that stand to hunt. And those have been like the first ones that we've replaced with cell cameras as we've kind of gathered more and more cell cameras over the years. Because those are just super intrusive. We would only check them when we hunted the stand. And so basically you wouldn't learn what was going on until after you sat the stand. And so, so a little bit of both. It just, you got to figure out what you can get away with without causing too much disturbance and roll with that.
Yeah. So let's move into November. And I've got 2 November situations that a lot of people, I think, dread. Like, we all look forward to the rut, probably most of us at least, more than anything else in the whitetail season, but there's 2 things that might happen that could throw a wrench in your plans. I'm curious if either one of these would bum you out, or maybe you don't care and you'll just keep on doing what you're usually doing. But here's one. Let's imagine it's the first week of November and you get to your property and it is 70% crop field. Let's say this is like a 70% of this property of access to is ag. The rest is some draws and some timber and some stuff like that. But you arrive for your big rut hunt and it is all standing corn. You've got several hundred acres of standing corn everywhere. Does this change what you would normally do for that first week of November? Or are you going to just do the same old? You're going to hunt your funnels or your doe bedding areas or whatever? Or is that standing corn going to make you say, okay, I have to switch things up a little bit? Because a lot of people will find that scenario and say, we didn't see any bucks because they're all in the standing corn. Or, this is going to be a horrible week. There's all the standing corn. All the chasing is going to happen in there. How would that impact what you think and do during that period?
Yeah, that's a tough question. I've definitely had that scenario happen before, and you hear it all the time of people like, they're in the corn. They're just in the corn. And I think that's an easy excuse for a lot of people. Mm-hmm. I've definitely seen deer, utilize the corn to an extent, but it's not like their preferred place to bed or their preferred place to run around and chase a doe through a bunch of stocks slapping them in the face. Like I'm not buying into that, at least. I've experienced it, but I don't think it's like I don't think it's like a go-to thing for a whitetail deer. So, I do think for sure, though. I mean, deer can, still bed in the timber nearby and still hang out in the timber nearby, and then just pop out in the corn and can eat, feed on the standing corn stalks. Which even then, though, like that time of year, they're not that concerned about it either. So, I don't know. I don't know if I can buy into that idea entirely. But I definitely have experienced it. And it definitely is a situation where I feel like it definitely subdues some of the activity that you do see. So, still going to hunt the rut, the typically good rut spots, and then just learn, from your observation. That's the biggest thing, is literally, every day you're in the stand, you're learning and you're observing movement. You're figuring out, more patterns of the deer, more what they're wanting to do. Or you're observing that through trail cameras, either way. But basically just ingesting all that information that you can, the most information you can will help you kind of make a decision and try to figure out what's best.
So what's your, you mentioned you would stick to your usual good rut stands, like high level, what would that be? What would you describe as like your ideal first week in November type of setup?
Yeah. So like, I don't know. I think like the first week in November, I like to hunt near green plots a lot, areas where like a big majority of the does are going to be feeding, because those bucks know that, and they are going to come there looking for that, first few does to come into heat. And then once you get into like that second and third week in November, the second week in November, really, you start to dive into the timber a little more. I love a good hardwoods rut spot, where you might get just crazy chasing and rutting activity. That's just kind of the pinnacle of the excitement of the rut. And so, obviously we look for pinch points, we look for funnels, we look for topography changes, whether it be like a saddle in a big ridge, or I'm just thinking back to a couple of years ago, I had a really, really cool hunt on November 7th back in the timber in the morning. That's basically on the end of a ridge. So this big long ridge just runs and then it drops off, and a couple other ridges kind of drop off down into this creek. And so it's really I did a hang and hunt initially the evening before, knowing it wasn't ideal conditions. Actually it was warm and it was really windy. But I knew that would be a good time to just slip in and hang a stand. And so I slipped in, hung the stand, left all my stuff in the tree. We didn't have a great hunt that evening, but I really was hanging it for the next morning. We left all our stuff in the tree. The cold front blew through that evening, and really, really dropped the temperature. We got in the next morning and actually ended up killing this buck that we hung the stand for. And it was more of like there wasn't necessarily like a pinch or anything obvious, but it was more like on the end of this ridge and knob, kind of an observation point to where you could see a long ways. And you could be able to call to deer to try to get them to come within bow range. But naturally, it also just happened to be a pretty good spot where that ridge ran out and deer were kind of crossing through there, because we had a great hunt that morning. Saw a bunch of deer and ended up, shooting that buck actually kind of later in the morning.
Nice. What about this situation then? I'm curious if this would change what you're describing. What if instead of the problem being standing corn, what if instead the problem was your entire week that you have budgeted for this trip is 75 degrees or 80 degrees, like just the worst rut weather you could dream up is what you've got, and you're stuck with it? What would you do then? Does that change anything? Or are you still going to do the same thing and just hope that we can get some success in the mornings or the evenings or whatever?
Yeah, I mean, there gets to a point where it's like you just got to go, right? You just got to try it. And especially if your time's limited and you have vacation set aside or whatever that might be. I mean, the rut's the rut. So, the deer are going to be, they're not going to quit rutting. The daylight activity definitely will be subdued by the warmer temperatures, but, in those situations, it may be even more crucial to kind of push the envelope a little bit, get closer to those bedding areas, get more deeper into the timber, because that movement may be, very, very first and very, very last light. And I don't know. I mean, that time of year, obviously, when even if it is unseasonably warm, I think your morning is going to be much more effective. Obviously, they're going to be cooler in the morning. They're going to have been running around, throughout the night, and so the mornings are typically a little bit more effective when you do have those warmer weather rut hunts. And I'm trying to think. Over the years, I've had some success for sure on warmer days, but there's not one that really sticks out in particular to me. But it just once the clock strikes November, it's like, all right, like you can get away with a little more. It's time to get a little more aggressive. You can, there's definitely there's definitely situations where you could be too conservative, in my opinion. And sometimes it's just like, all right, like throw it out the window and go and just try, because at that point you're relying so much on the deer anyways. That's why, like I said earlier, targeting a specific mature buck like during November is very, very difficult. Early season is going to be that time, but then, the time where your odds are best to kill any mature buck is probably going to be November, just because they're cruising, they're moving, their guards down. You may not know which one it's going to be. Maybe one of the three that you know about, or maybe one you don't even know about. So it's just a different time of year, completely different style of hunting.
Yeah. So along those lines, let's go back to that 3-year hunt for a specific target buck again. Let's say you end up, seeing this buck. Now we're into November. You've been having encounters with him, but you haven't been able to close the deal. And he's still he's the one. Yeah, there might be other deer coming through, but you're dead set on this deer. You've invested so much time and energy. You can't imagine not shooting this deer. But we get to the situation you alluded to earlier, which is opening day of firearm season. It's staring you right in the face, yeah. And you are here on the day before the opener. You've got the last day before the opener, and you're panicked. Maybe you're not panicked. I don't know. If it's me, I'm panicked because it's my last day before. There's a million people out there with guns, and he's going to get killed probably. At least in my mind, I'm like, dang it. If I don't kill him today, he's getting killed tomorrow by someone. What's your mindset, and what do you do? How would you approach that last day? Do you throw a Hail Mary? Do you do something crazy? Do you just stick to the original plan? What do you do on that last day before firearm?
Listen, I feel like I'm a pretty aggressive hunter, especially during the rut. But in this situation, I 100% am not throwing a Hail Mary. I think that's the worst thing you could do, especially if there's any chance this buck is, anywhere close to a neighboring property. The last thing you want to do is bump him out of his spot that he's comfortable with, push him onto the neighbors where there's going to be 10 guys in blaze orange blazing guns across there. So I'm definitely playing it safe in that situation. Typically in those situations is when I just bow out and head to Kansas, and then let the Missouri property just be a refuge for the deer during the gun season.
Season sanctuary.
That's kind of our go-to deal. But yeah, definitely I would not be aggressive in those situations, because that happens a lot. People just feel that pressure, oh no, I gotta get this buck, I gotta get my opportunity, and then boom, that buck's been so comfortable in his area, and you bump him out, and he may venture off to somewhere else where he's not as protected. But the opposite could be true as well. Maybe it's a buck that's really living on the neighbors a lot, and you feel like you really need to get aggressive to make that happen. And in that situation, I could see that happening. But yeah, if you got a pretty good idea of where the deer's living and that he's living on you, then yeah, I gotta stick to the original plan.
All right, that takes some self-control, Mike. I'm impressed.
Well, yeah, I'm not much of a panicker, but yeah, Sean would be pretty panicked. He gets the anxiety when the Orange Army comes out for sure.
Yeah, it can take a few years off your life, that's for sure.
I know, it's just one of those deals, man. It is what it is. It's at the end of the day, there's only so much that we can do, so much that's in our control, and we've been doing this a long time. I've been bow hunting whitetails for, over 20 years now, and we've been seriously managing for deer for, I'd say, 10, and so that's a really rewarding process. We've been trying to in Missouri get deer to the ripe age of 5 years old, and it's just very difficult to do. And but when it all works out, it's amazing. But to your point about the the rifle situation, I actually passed up. This was 2 falls ago. We had this just beautiful 4-year-old. He was a 3-year-old, probably mid-60s 3-year-old. A bunch of trash, just monster frame. Didn't have a big growth year, 3 to 4. He was probably 170s, lower 70s. So he probably grew like 5, 6 inches, 7 inches, whatever. And was like but 170-inch 4-year-old. I mean, 170-inch deer. I haven't killed that many 170-inch deer. That being said, I don't get too caught up on that. Like, I'm not like, oh, I gotta pass this deer so he'll be 200 inches. But we just like to see what they can do, and that this deer had that potential. And so I can't remember what it was, early November. I had him come in chasing a doe, just grunting, running all over this food plot right in front of me, just incredible. Comes right under the tree, makes a scrape at like 5 yards, and just an unbelievable hunt. And let him walk, and the next week got shot by one of the neighbors, and I was just like, had the wind out of my sail. I was like, man, like I'm not passing up those opportunities anymore. Like I'm not going to do it. Like if it's a big deer that gets me going, that I'm excited to shoot, like I'm going to shoot them. Like enough deer are still going to make it to 5 and 6 and 7 years old because they're just smart and it's inevitable. So I was like, I'm not doing that again. And so actually the buck I shot last year in Missouri, just a beautiful 160 something, low 60s. And he was a 4-year-old. He was a deer that we knew was 4, had potential to be who knows what, but I just said, I'm not doing it. I'm not doing it again. And so that's actually the buck that I shot last year. So
I can't blame you for that, man. If it gets you pumped, let her rip.
That's right. Yeah, that's for sure. And yeah, I'm all for that stuff. We get a lot of people that are just like, oh yeah, you guys, you're naming deer and you're getting caught up on the age and this and that. And we're in a different position than a lot of other people. And that's kind of what we like to do. And we get to spend a lot of time out there managing our properties and doing stuff. And so that's what makes it exciting for us. And so that's why we do what we do. But then, we go on different hunts where we're hunting a piece of property we've never stepped foot on, and we run some cameras, and our expectations are a little bit different. Or Sean last year drew his Iowa tag and went and hunted public land in Iowa, and obviously expectations were different. He wasn't going to hold out for a 5-year-old, 170-inch deer or whatever. He was going to shoot the first thing that made him happy, that he thought was a good representation of the area and the property he was hunting. So it really is circumstantial in my opinion.
Yeah, for sure. So I want to run you through now some quick rapid fire questions. So these will be like a very simple, like yes or no answer, or this or that answer. And we'll just run through these really quick, one after the other. Okay.
Okay.
All right. Does the moon matter to deer movement? Yes or no?
Yes.
Would you take a 50-yard shot at a whitetail with your bow? Yes or no?
Yes.
If you could only have one of these for the rest of your life, would you rather have a set of rattling antlers with you in the tree or a grunt tube?
Ooh, grunt tube.
Expandable or fixed blade broadheads?
Expandable.
Should you stop a buck with some kind of sound before shooting? Yes or no?
If he's not already stopped on his own.
This one's
I don't know if I'm allowed to expand. I want to expand on every single one of them.
I know. I'm gonna give you the pass on that. This next one's gonna get you in trouble. Which state has better deer hunters, Kansas or Missouri?
Ooh, gotta say Missouri.
Okay. And here's one last one. This one you can expand as much as you want on. Imagine that I am all powerful. I am in control of hunting across the country, and I'm going to tell you that I'm going to take away your hunting privileges for the next 10 years. You cannot hunt again for the next 10 years at all, unless you kill a 5-year-old buck this year. The problem is you only have one day and one specific location that I'm going to allow you to hunt on. And you have to kill a 5-year-old buck to keep your hunting rights for the next 10 years. So it's a very high-stakes hunt. So tell me this, Mike. What specific date would you pick for this hunt? and paint me the picture of the very specific location you would choose for this important hunt.
Oh boy, that is a lot of pressure.
Yes.
Just based on stats and history, I'm going to have to go with November 7th. That has been the most productive day of November for me throughout the years, I feel like. And oh man, as far as are we talking Missouri here, I guess?
You can pick anywhere you want to go.
Oh man, anywhere. You know what? If I had to choose anywhere, it's going to be Kansas, for sure. And I'm not there usually on November 7th, but as far as just like odds of killing a mature deer in November, like that is the area that I hunt out there is creek bottoms and draws and very a lot of open, pasture ground and tillable ag fields, and so just sets up perfectly for rut hunting. Just everything's a pinch point essentially. The deer are literally just cruising up and down, checking these pinch points. Kansas is also a bait state, so most properties that were hunting Kansas were at least running either a corn pile or a feeder, which not necessarily that time of year hunting over it much at all, really. It's just keeping an eye on what deer are in the area, so you got a good idea of what, where to hunt and what farms and what places to key on. So, so this specific spot that I'm kind of thinking of is a spot that I killed my Kansas deer 2 years ago, and it's basically a river bottom by an old homestead that kind of runs through, and it crosses this old road, and it butts up to these big rolling, like almost like not sand hills, but like the Flint Hills, like the kind of the Flint Hills of Kansas.
Mm-hmm.
And these deer the bucks will kind of push does up into the Flint Hills, into these like little cuts and little cedar draws, but then they always come down to the river down when they are seeking does. And so this particular stand that I'm thinking of, just a great observation point. You can really see to call a long ways. You could even decoy, but also you get it's kind of a all-in-one. It's the rut funnel, it's a observation spot, and it's a decoy spot, kind of all kind of intertwined into one.
I like it. I like your odds, Mike. And with that, you've made it through the What Would You Do gauntlet. So well done. And
all right,
for folks that want to see what you guys have got going on with Heartland Bowhunter, where can they watch the show? Where can they see your other videos? How can they follow along?
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, everywhere. We our new season of the show, season 14, is airing right now on Outdoor Channel. New episodes are dropping each week. Our prime airing is Thursday at 9:30. Obviously, social media is the best way to kind of keep up. Instagram and Facebook, kind of keep up on the up and up on what's the latest, what new videos are dropping, and then we have a YouTube channel as well. We're putting out regular content there. We produce a couple different digital series there. So we're on Amazon Prime. We're on VHX digital download, pretty much anywhere, iTunes, anywhere content can be consumed. And so if we're somewhere where you consume content and we're not there, then we need to know about it.
Awesome, man. Well, I can't recommend your stuff enough. For years and years and years, have been following what you're doing, and you guys never cease to impress. So keep up the good work, and thanks so much for taking the time to chat today.
Yeah, absolutely, man. It's always good catching up. It's we go way back. I still think back to the Iowa Deer Classic days and
yeah,
and the ATA days back in the day.
Oh man, we were just a couple kids back then.
I know it. I believe you were camping in a car, sleeping in a car one year, if I recall correctly.
Yeah, that came to mind this morning when I was thinking about our chat today. I was like, I remember back in the day sitting at the bar chatting with you and then going back to sleep in a parking garage.
On that grind, man.
Yep.
That's what people don't get.
We've come a long way.
They want to get started, want to be involved in the industry. It's not an easy one, but you you got to be willing to do what it takes, and you got to be in it for the right reasons. That's the big thing.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I'm glad that we're still both here doing it. It's been a lot of fun. So
wouldn't have it any other way.
That's for sure. Well, thanks, buddy. Let's do it again soon.
All right, until next time.
See you, Mike. All right, and that's a wrap. Thank you again for tuning in. I will just remind you to please follow John's advice from the beginning of the podcast and make sure you stay tuned on all things Recovering America's Wildlife Act. Make sure you're learning about the updates there. Join a conservation organization or get on their newsletter so you can stay up to date. Send an email or a note to your representatives, your senators, and stay tuned, because as this thing moves down the line, we want to be able to jump on it and take action immediately when it's most impactful. And I'll be sure to keep you all updated as well. Secondly, make sure you're checking out everything from Heartland Bowhunter, their show on TV, their YouTube channel, social media, whatever it is. These guys are doing great work. I know you'll enjoy it. And I personally at least want to stay up to speed on what Mike's got going on this season, and hopefully he'll put a couple more bucks on the ground. So with that all said, thank you all for tuning in. Appreciate it. And until next time, stay wired to hunt.
I'm sure a lot of you guys remember the old ceremonial hunting tradition of eating the heart out of the first animal you kill. Meat from those organs are among the most nutrient-rich foods on the planet. You can get those same benefits your ancestors craved via convenient daily capsules from Heart and Soil. Find out more at heartandsoil.co. And remember, use code MeatEater for 10% off your purchase.